medical oncologist from Bhubaneswar, Dr. Aditya Murli, medical oncologist from Bangalore, Dr. Chira Ranjan Kadanga, radiation oncologist from Bhubaneswar, and Dr. Saurav Chaudhary, surgical oncologist from Kolkata. Over to you, sir. Amish sir, yeah.
Yes.
Perfect.
Okay. Fine. Perfect. Thank you very much for this panel. Before we move on to case discussion, I have a question for Dr. Vivek Agarwala first. Vivek.
Yes, sir.
Why do we have DM medical oncology program in India, or why do we have MCH surgical oncology program in India?
Sir, I think this is because of the lack of interdepartmental collaborative efforts. So we don't have societies where radiation oncologists.
No, I'm talking of DM medical oncology. Why do we have that? Forget about geriatric, just routine DM medical oncology.
If you look at Vivek's t-shirt, you will get the answer.
I can't see the full t-shirt.
It is to earn our bread.
Okay, I think the important point is that we need specialists in each field. Dr. Chira Ranjan.
Yes, sir.
Before we move on, we all know that MD radiotherapist or people who are trained in radiotherapy are the only one who can give radiotherapy in India.
Yes.
So, with the data that 70% of cancer patients by 2030 is going to be more than 65 years, and
Yes.
there is going to be 700% explosion in the population above the age group of 80 years in India. Why do you think that we do not have geriatric oncologists, or we are not trained for geriatric oncology?
We are standing in the line of evolution. Earlier, before 1970s, 80s, it was the only radiation oncologist or radiotherapist who were treating the cancers in most of the portion of India. But right now, apart from radiation, medical and surgical, we have pediatric oncologists. So it is quite possible that in future years, we will have a specialist in geriatric oncology because their body functions are a bit different than the young populations, like creatinine clearance, the kidney functions, that decreases. By age 70 years, the creatinine clearance decreases to a range of 70 to 80 milliliter per minute. Cardiac functions like ejection fraction also decreases to 55-60%. There is concentric LVH and other like non-alcoholic steatohepatitis and all those things, some osteoporosis in females. And
yes, so Dr. Chira Ranjan, what you say is that these patients can have a lot of organ dysfunction and we need to have a specialized branch. With that, let's start the case discussion for today. This is a real life case and I have kept this case keeping Dr. Hemant Malhotra in mind. If sir is there, this is an 80-year-old retired colonel from army. He stays with his wife. Wife has COPD and atrial fibrillation. Children are settled abroad. Well-controlled hypertension only on one drug. He got diagnosed with right-sided localized CA colon. Surgery, hemicolectomy done. Patient discharged from hospital on day 3. Pre-op, all investigations are normal. Histopath report shows moderately differentiated adenocarcinoma. PT3, N2, microsatellite stable. Next slide, please. I want all the panelists. So I was the 4th medical oncologist when the patient came to me for opinion. I want all the panelists to answer just simple yes, no, or maybe. Will you treat this 80-year-old patient with adjuvant chemotherapy? Dr. Vivek?
Okay. So, sir, yes.
No, yes, no, or maybe. Just 3. Yes. Dr. Arif?
Dr. Arif has not joined.
Dr. Soumya?
Yeah. Definitely yes for tonight.
Just yes, no, or maybe.
Yes.
Okay. Dr. Aditya Murli?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Can we go to the next slide? So this patient, according to majority of the medical oncologists in the panel, is a candidate for adjuvant chemotherapy. Now the question is, at the age 80, will he benefit from chemotherapy? So the patient asked me, sir, I'm 80 years old. I have lived a happy and healthy life. How long will I live? I may die before the cancer takes me over. Now, do we have Dr. Saurav Chaudhary? Dr. Saurav, you have operated on this patient. Patient asks you this question, sir, thodo, why do you torture me with adjuvant chemotherapy? Where am I going to live long? What should be your take on this? Dr. Saurav.
I will prefer for adjuvant therapy because it is a stage 3 and probably into disease. And I will counsel the patient regarding the post-operative course when there will be recurrence. If there is some recurrence, the treatment options will be limited because surgical options is very limited because I have seen relapse of patients, CA colon, but the relapse tumor or mass has to inherit the surrounding structure. So if we consider the patient of the adjuvant chemotherapy, maybe chance of recurrence is less. So
you are not worried about the 80 years of age, Dr. Saurav. Say if the patient is going to live for just 2-3 years more, will you offer adjuvant chemotherapy to this patient?
It is not a chronological age. It is a physiological age. Patient has no comorbidities except well-controlled hypertension. So why am I supposed to take the life survival is only 82 years?
Life, yes, 82 years. Vivek, how do you take life expectancy into picture? This patient asks a pertinent question.
So, sir, there is a part on which we assume, and there is a part where you actually follow certain simple tables or
Can we have next slide, please?
Questionnaire and actually calculating.
Yes.
Yeah. So, sir, the e-prognosis site, as I said, it represents a very nice way to calculating and giving a realistic image to the patient as what may be his life expectancy. So the patient is quite fit and he has not had any sort of complication post surgery. If he can tolerate a surgery so well, so I think you can tell him that he can also tolerate chemotherapy well.
Excellent. So this e-prognosis is a portal where you enter some of the questions and it gives you the expectancy in terms of percentage. Just to give you a perspective, when the e-prognosis algorithm was revised, 2,500 plus patients with a median age of 79 years was kept in mind. Can I have the next slide, please? So in this patient, after putting all the information, it says that 5-year mortality is 23% and the 9-year mortality is 52%. Dr. Aditya Murli, what does this 5-year mortality of 23% tell you?
So what this tells me is that in a patient who's got a heavy nodal burden disease, the chances are that the disease will relapse faster than his life expectancy is. So if, although the cohort is different, this took a cohort of mainly male Caucasians. If we try to extrapolate this to the Indian cohort, and we might be tempted to extrapolate because he's a fit gentleman, and as Soumya has said, age is just a chronological number. Extrapolating this, I would be tempted, and since I have answered yes to adjuvant chemotherapy, I would use this as a justification for my yes to adjuvant therapy.
Excellent. Do you know so Dr. Bharat Bhosle in his debate in the first slide said that at the age of 70, life expectancy in Indian male is 8.1 to 30.9 years. So even in the Indian population, we'll have many patients crossing 80 years. So next slide, please. As Aditya said and as Dr. Saurav said, this is an N2 disease. The clinical and pathological features in the relapsed patient, Dr. Soumya, in your clinical practice, if this N2 patient disease, say any patient of any age group, you have given modified FOLFOX6, patient has tolerated well, and the patient has relapsed within 1 year, what is the life expectancy what you see?
In colorectal cancer, if he has relapsed, then on an average we see something.
Next slide.
Yes.
Yeah, please, Soumya, carry on.
So on an average, we see something like close to 3 years, but the heterogeneity of the tumor has to be kept in mind. So we have to look at the molecular markers, that whether they have a tendency to relapse early or they've got a tendency to relapse late.
Right. So this is the right-sided tumor. There's a nice paper from Turkey that if you relapse early or late in an N2 disease, you do not live. Median survival is not beyond 18 to 20 months. Next slide, please. So far we have learned that this is an 80-year-old gentleman who looks fit, stays alone with ailing wife. tolerated surgery extremely well. End to disease. 5-year expected mortality, as Aditya mentioned, is 23%. This means there is a 77% chance that he will cross 3 years and he won't live beyond 2 years if he relapses from colon cancer. Next slide, please. So again, I know all the panelists earlier only had answered. I thought many of the panelists would say maybe, but I'm happy. Next slide, please. So any of the medical oncologists, I see that Dr. Aditya Murli, how will you make sure that this patient is fit for modified FOLFOX6 for 6 months? N2 disease, I'm not talking of IDEA right now, there's a separate debate. Let's talk modified FOLFOX6 for 6 months, 3 months, but how will you make sure that he's fit to receive combination chemo in a standard dose?
So generally, when I was playing way back, I had a colleague of mine who was doing some thesis on crash score. So I have been exposed to use of crash score for quite a while now. For the last 7 8 years, I have been exposed to crash score. So, and we have a specific geriatric medicine specialist in our center. So we send him to the geriatric medicine specialist to assess his mental status, assess his other comorbidities, and I try and get the crash score into place. And thanks to you and your all the slides that you have sent me, I have learned something new, and which I will hopefully apply in my practice day after tomorrow. But I definitely do crash score in my practice, and based upon that, if this patient is fit, I would give FOLFOX, because see, minusing the OX may not be such a good idea because patient is again MSI stable.
MSI
so
stable.
Giving only 5FU.
Correct. You have an absolutely valid point, Aditya. Absolutely valid point. Vivek, you have a paper in elderly breast cancer patients. What I saw publication of yours.
Yes.
Did you do any geriatric assessment that Aditya Murli said in those breast cancer patients? Or would you like to do a full GA in this patient?
So, sir, doing a comprehensive full geriatric assessment is something that is time taking. But I think institutionally, what you should have every page for every institution or for every capacity, there should be a protocol which should include some minimum data sets that you should try to get for geriatric patients.
So next
that,
slide, that will answer your question.
That for each and every patient.
Right. So this particular patient, the geriatric assessment is very important in colorectal cancer, because if you see on the top chart, if the patient can have multiple geriatric conditions, but the same author after 5 years in the bottom chart has said, if the patient does not have any geriatric condition, this patient with early colorectal cancer can survive longer, as seen by the blue chart. Next slide, please. So far, we have a fit 80-year-old patient, good life expectancy, needs treatment to survive up to his life expectancy. Geriatric condition needs to be assessed. Next slide. So how do we do geriatric assessment? This patient, Aditya Murli, said, that he does some crash and psychiatric evaluation. Dr. Saurav, do you do any prehabilitation before surgery in your geriatric patients? Because these geriatric assessment full-fledged may take more than 2-5 hours based on the assessment. Very quickly, Dr. Saurav.
Obviously, every patient should be optimized before any surgery, particularly the geriatric patients, because all physiological system is deranged, supposedly to be deranged, although not on all patients. So from physiotherapy to orthopedic checkup to eye ENT checkup to all organ systems, optimization is necessary. It's absolutely necessary. And if you take other nurses, psychiatrists, physiotherapists, it will take longer time. But if a treating surgeon or oncologist to do the geriatric assessment, it will take only 15 to 20 minutes. That's all.
Excellent, Dr. Saurav. You have hit the nail. Next slide, please. So this is Dr. Supriya Mohile gave a minimum requirement for geriatric oncology patient to assess the vulnerability. It's an ASCO guideline 2018 August. Next slide, please. So there are 8 minimum criteria which are to be done. We can go into the details of that. Next slide, please. So So Dr. Prashant Mehta and Dr. Advait Gore, I spoke to both of them, and both of them told me that they take around 20 to 25 minutes for doing geriatric assessment, the short geriatric assessment, as suggested by ASCO Geriatric Oncology Guidelines, takes around 20 to 25 minutes. Next slide, please. So this is how we divide. E-prognosis takes 2 minutes. IADL function takes 4 to 5 minutes. Charlson Comorbidity Index takes 2 minutes. Fall, there is only one question. Geriatric depression scale, 22 questions, yes, no, 5 minutes. Mini-cog, 7 minutes. Malnutrition assessment, just 2 minutes. Why are we not doing geriatric assessment in all our elderly patients? Vivek, you have raised your finger. Answer that question. We need to move.
So, sir, what I want to say that you have shown 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, but if we really carefully look into the each and every assessment, we will see that many of the questions are common. So, if you really devise time, then probably the time is going to be much less.
Right, great. Soumya, do you agree with Vivek? And why are we not doing geriatric assessment in all of our patients, especially in next 10 years, we are going to see 70% of patients above 65 years of age?
So frankly, I must confess that yeah, we are not doing that regularly, though we would like to do that, and definitely such these are all more we discuss about that, we do incorporate in our practice. So
absolutely,
practice more you do that.
Thank you so much. Next slide, please. So this is the crash, similar like crash as Aditya mentioned. This is a CARG score, Cancer and Aging Research Group. Next slide, please. So this is again a calculator like e-prognosis. You put in all, it takes hardly 2 minutes. Now previous slide, please. And it gives the score 0 to 3, 4 to 5. And if you see this classical exponential manner, as the score increases, the chances of chemotoxicity is higher and higher. This really guides you in your clinical practice. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So, our patient, if I give you a geriatric assessment, 80-year-old fit, independent, good life expectancy, has end to disease, needs adjuvant chemotherapy, GDS score is 2, no depression, Mini-cog clear, IADL 7 out of 8, clear, comorbidity only 1, no history of falls in last 6 months, no malnutrition over 3 questions asked, chemotoxicity 33% chance of grade 3 to 5 toxicity, which is quite good actually. Next slide, please. So our patient falls into this. This patient, even though he is 80 years, cannot be denied the adjuvant treatment. Next slide, please. Right. So again, I think all the panelists here agree that this patient will require a full dose modified FOLFOX6 for 6 months. Do I agree? All the medical oncologists agree with this, or anybody has a separate opinion? We have 2 minutes left.
So, Dr. Amish, so
yes.
What I want to say is that when I started with this case, my opinion was single agent 5-FU. But as I went through the geriatric assessment, I was confident that no, this patient can handle FOLFOX. So that there is, this is how the geriatric assessment actually contributes to your change of thought. That when you practically do it, it really changes your opinion. And now, after seeing his geriatric assessment, I'm confident that although I need to be very, very careful, I need to pre-optimize the patient. I need to, ask him to do more exercise so that there is less impact of neuropathy, but oxaliplatin can be added to this patient.
Excellent. Next slide, please. So the last thing I'm just going to rush through. We have 1 minute. Patient after doing all these activities, sir, I always hear clinical trial is for young patients. Do you have even data? Next slide, please. So this is the data from ASCO in 2017. Next slide, please. Next slide. This clearly shows that patients above 75 years of age, and if they are fit, if they are given chemo, they live longer, period. Next slide. So what are the take-home messages? There is an advantage of giving chemotherapy even at the extremes of age. Elderly patients with no geriatric condition do well. Life expectancy even at age 80 can be more And survival due to cancer, geriatric assessment is doable, easy, OPD procedure. Last but not the least, next slide. We should select patients who are going to live longer with or without cancer, and they deserve the dignity of the right treatment. And as Vivek rightly said, our patient completed 6 months of modified FOLFOX, grade 2 neuropathy and fatigue as in complete remission since last 18 months. Thank you very much, and 3 seconds left. Over to organizers.
Yeah, so that was an excellent one, Amish sir, as usual. We always learn from you. So we have a couple of questions, many from Dr. Vikas Talreja. So can comprehensive geriatric assessment be done by nurses or paraclinical staff? Maybe Amish sir can answer this.
Yes, it can be done. In fact, the majority of the European countries where they have resources lacking, there is a nurse practitioner who is specialized in geriatric assessment. In fact, in Tata Memorial Hospital also, Dr. Narona has started a geriatric clinic, and she was saying that she is training the nurse practitioners to take the geriatric oncology assessment in the initial phases so that the time is saved and the final interpretation can be done by medical oncologists.
So I missed the order. So you can go to the first slide. So Dr. Vikas is asked, how frequently do we do polypharmacy? You can go to the first slide. Dr. Vivek, you can take up. How frequently do you practice polypharmacy drug interaction before giving chemotherapy? Dr. Vivek?
So I think it is a very, very common aspect that we do not only in our elderly patients but even in our younger patients, just because the elderly patients are more likely to be taking multiple drugs. That is why it becomes more pertinent in them, but we do it even in our younger patients.
Chandrakant, can I say something?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. So this is where, as Dr. Amish said, it's important to have a proper team also with you. So where I practice, I have a nurse practitioner and an oncopharmacist. So before any patient's file comes to me, it has to go through both these assessments, wherein the oncopharmacist goes through already all the drugs that the patient has been on. So that is one checkpoint wherein we can try and make out if there is any interaction or if there is going to be any other issue on that. At the same time, the nurse practitioner also does, because it seems a little odd if you're sitting in the OPD and you're talking to a patient, and if you look on log into the internet and try and do all these assessments. So if we can devise a mechanism wherein all these already come to us, and if there's a protocol for all of this, then it will be a smooth sailing in the OPD.
Yeah, so that makes a fair comment. And going further, so what about the mutation, targeted mutations, TMB? Dr. Soumya, you can take up this question.
Yeah, so with more aging, we are likely to develop more of mutations. So it is expected that more number of mutations might be there, but definitely there is no data to say that the KRAS is more or NRAS is more. It is more fitness that we know. But yes, if geriatric oncology may be discussed in future, more of molecular oncology will creep in inside with time.
So, Dr. Chandrakant, can I add a comment?
Yes, sir. Sure.
Foundation Medicine has come out with a paper where they have found in 300 odd patients that the molecular profile in elderly age group is different from their younger counterparts. Even in colorectal cancer, if you see, there was an ASCO education book paper that especially BRAF mutation is more common in the patients of elderly age. So there is a molecular profile different. It is just that we need to start doing this on a regular basis so that we understand more and more about these patients.
Dr. Vivek, what is your take on the next question? Why don't we start DM geriatric oncology?
So Tata Hospital has already started this.
Yeah.
So it's already available, fellowship in geriatric oncology.
Done. Okay, next question, we can go ahead. Any next slide? Yeah, this we have completed. Next slide. Yeah, done. Sir, today's age, yeah. So what percentage of, so we wanted to give FOLFOX chemotherapy for 6 months. So what percentage of geriatric patients complete total 6 months or 12 cycles of FOLFOX regimen? Amish sir, you can put.
I work in a very small volume clinic. My center is very small volume, so I do not have data. And fortunately, because of that, after geriatric assessment, majority of my patients complete the planned treatment. In fact, with the idea and with the Prodigy trial, now we have a lot of luxury of giving 3 months versus 6 months. So this makes the life much easier.
Easier. Yeah.
So it is there. But just going by Dr. Purvish Parikh's one question, which this thing, how are you comfortable doing geriatric assessment online? Sir, I need to learn do's and don'ts from you. But I have done around 8 geriatric assessment based on ASCO guidelines online. And I have a recording of all 8. Took the feedback from the patients. 7 patients replied that they were very happy and comfortable with the online assessment. 2 patients I refused to come out of the house because their assessment was so poor. They were so frail that I thought that in metastatic setting they would not tolerate even oral chemotherapy. The remaining patients, I guided them that yes, you should continue the further treatment. So that is a question which you had asked.
Great. So final one, Dr. Soumya, you can take K-Pox, FOLFOX, elderly, any reservations?
Not much. We are having right now data from the IDEA trial, and the IDEA trial had patients who were up to 84 age. So there was a chunk of patients, and right now we have data that can also be safe and as well as FOLFOX.
So I think
I would be only very careful regarding the creatinine clearance in the elderly age group. So that is the only where you are concerned regarding giving capecitabine, because 5-FU can be used in even in a lower creatinine clearance, and we know many of these patients are having actually compensated renal function due to age.
Yeah, Cockcroft formula does not apply in extremes of age. As Vivek said, we have to be very careful when we use that for creat clearance. Yeah.
So I think that was an excellent session. We learned a lot, and I would thank Dr. Purvish and Dr. Vikas for providing the opportunity. So back to the organizers.
Wonderful session.
Sorry, the session director of the Big Fight one is Dr. Lalit Mohan Sharma, medical oncologist from Jaipur, and the session coordinator is Dr. Pankaj Kumar Panda, medical oncologist from Chennai. We had taken a survey before the debate, and approx 52% believe that cross is better than flow. Now I'd like to request Dr. Lalit Mohan Sharma to please give the context setting. Over to you, sir.
Yeah, very good evening to all of you. And we all know that incidence of G-junction adenocarcinomas are remarkably going high in the real world setting and in India as well. And most of these studies are focusing on esophagus or gastric cancer separately, and G-junction cancers are discussed less in different scientific meetings as well as addressed less often. And we all believe that results of surgery alone is not good enough, and the 5-year survival even with R0 resection is close to 40%. Hence, there is emphasis on peri-operative systemic chemotherapy and neoadjuvant chemoradiation. Even definition of G-junction is variable. When I checked, it's different amongst anatomists, physiologists, pathologists, and endoscopists. So this area is still gray area and it needs a lot of discussions. So over the last more than 15 years, various trials have been addressed, including MAGIC trial, Accord, German POET trial, FLOAT and CROSS have been tried, and different results are available, and many of us are using these parameters. Till date, head-to-head comparison of neoadjuvant chemoradiation versus perioperative chemotherapy applying contemporary protocols are still lacking, and we are still confused that how to use, which is to be used, and meta-analysis have shown benefit of perioperative chemotherapy as well as neoadjuvant chemoradiation. But still we don't know the best preoperative regimen, and we don't know the best way to use. So today's big fight is to clear our doubts about the perioperative chemotherapy or neoadjuvant chemoradiation in esophagus as well as G junction cancers. So with this brief introduction, we have two experienced and learned debaters to give us a big fight as well as give us insight, Dr. Sandeep Batra and Dr. Mangesh Kamath. So with this brief introduction, may I request Dr. Sandeep to start with his session.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Lalit, for the brief introduction, a nice introduction. So the topic itself is debatable because FLOT never enrolled the esophageal cancer patients. So half of the debate is already over because since FLOT did not have esophageal cancer patients, it was only GE junction and gastric. So I have to debate only about the GE junction. And this half can also be completed because the same debate was there between Dr. Prasad and Dr. Bharat earlier. However, I have a few more points to make. So there was a need for FLOT which was considered because MAGIC at its best has a 36% 5-year survival, which was anyways much less than the 5-year survival for the cross. So that's why you mix some concoctions, made a toxic combination to improve your response rate in the form of FLOT. And then you wanted to get a good response. However, you could only achieve a survival which reached only with the cross, which was a much gentler treatment. Next slide, please. So next slide, please. So there was almost about 3/4 of a decade difference between conduct of the cross and the FLOT trials, and technology improvement and the surgical technique improvement. If we are there at the time of cross, obviously the result would have been as compared to the FLOT. And if you can see on the left, 100% patients in the FLOT arm were adenocarcinoma. There was not a single squamous cell carcinoma. So that means esophagus was out because the investigators knew without the radiation you cannot control a esophageal disease, whether it is a local or a loco-regional control. However, cross had a representation from both the squamous cell carcinomas and the adenocarcinomas, upper, middle, lower thoracic esophagus, as well as the GE junction carcinomas. We don't have a subset analysis from the FLOT. What was the exact improvement in the GE junction adenocarcinoma? So there can not be a direct comparison made. Next slide. And even at the genetic basis on the total cancer genome atlas, we cannot extrapolate the result of an esophageal adenocarcinoma to an esophageal squamous cell carcinoma. Next slide, please. Now, tolerance-wise, FLOT was a very, very poor tolerated protocol. Only 90% completed all 4 doses preoperatively, and less than 50% completed the all allocated cycles, and almost 40% patient had to discontinue the treatment because of the toxicity or on the patient request or on the disease progression or on the death. However, 92% of the patient in the cross arm could complete their treatment, which is a very good number. Next, please. Coming to the side effects in the form of neutropenias, more than 50% at grade 3 or 4 neutropenias, with 10% having significant diarrheas, and all grade infections, grade 3 and 4 were 18%, which was serious infections. Even if it was grade 1 or 2 diarrheas, it was 52%. So imagine for 6 months, 52% patients will be having continuous diarrhea. In contrast, none of these side effects they were at the maximum. They were leukopenia or neutropenia, which did not require any hospitalization and were manageable on the OPD basis by tempering the GCSF or the radiation. Next, please. Post-op toxicity after the FLOT, even it was also significant. More than 50% patients getting a post-operative complications requiring more than 2 weeks of stay in the hospital, and reoperations 10%, death within 30 days of surgery, and within 90 days making 7% death in the FLOT patients post-operatively. Next, please. After entailing so much of toxicity, the R0 resection in FLOT was 85%, which was nowhere near the cross, which was 92%. And pathological CR, which is a sentinel for the overall survival, you can see it was almost double from 16% in FLOT to 29% in the cross. Next, please. Coming to the main key point, median overall survival 50 months, and that too because of a D2 dissection, which was nowhere there in the cross, especially in the GE junctions. It was only some selective lymph node dissection with a median OS of 49.4 months. I believe if 1 decade had passed, the techniques as well as the surgical techniques and the improvement in the technology of radiation would have surpassed this 50 months, that is more than 2 weeks. And if you see the median disease-free survival, it was 30 months in the FLOT, it was 37.7 months in the cross trial. And estimated OS at 5 years for FLOT was 45%. In contrast, it was 52% for the cross, much above the FLOT. Next, please. So even the Indian authors, they have said our calculated guess is that NACRT is likely to be superior to NACT in squamous cell carcinomas. Next, please. So these 3 further slides back to back show if you increase the number of lymph node dissections in the esophageal cancer and for that matter gastric cancers as well, your survival, 5-year survival improves. So coming to the next, so what was the difference between the MAGIC and the FLOAT? It was not only the change in the chemotherapy backbone, but also the improvement in the surgical techniques and the number of lymph node samples. I will be coming to that in the later while. Coming next, please. So this particular trial, which I have mentioned, showed that the effects of perioperative treatment in lower stages could be negated by the effects of the radical surgery in lower stages. That's for the perioperative chemotherapy. So any stage which is less than 3B and 3C, which was a significant number in the FLOAT, does not have that benefit which is required. Next, please. So FLOAT fallacy is in the control arm, the improvement in the MAGIC of the OS was 35 months as compared to baseline, which was 25 months, 10 months, the same protocol, not giving survival. Next, please. So even FLOAT author concluded that adenocarcinoma, it remains an open question for the T junction. Next, please. While Cross said neoadjuvant chemotherapy, according to Cross, followed by surgical resection, should be viewed as a standard of care for patients with resectable advanced esophageal junctional cancer. Next, please. So, genomic lens also says the same thing. Next, please. Poet and next slide, please. Have already been given by the Dr. Prasad. Next, please. And just last conclusion slide. Unless convincing result to the contrary become available, strong evidence for cross trial continues to support neoadjuvant chemoradiotherapy as a standard of care for both squamous cell and adenocarcinoma of the esophagus or EG junction. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Now I'd like to request our next debater, Dr. Mangesh Kamath, to please go ahead. Over to you, sir.
Yes, thank you very much, Kashish and Creations and Dr. Lalit for the opportunity. Just like the game of cricket, it is probably very difficult to chase. Dr. Sandeep has had the upper hand with respect to all the data that he has provided. There has been a lot of background setting before we got down to this debate, but I will try to tell my perspective after discussing with very important aspect of management of esophageal cancers, that is the thoracic surgeon or the surgical oncologist or the surgical gastroenterologist. I will try to focus my thoughts on this. So I asked across a board of at least 10 surgical oncologists and surgical gastroenterologists in the city as well as the country who do surgeries after neoadjuvant CRT and after neoadjuvant chemo. Out of the 10, 9 of them told that after the neoadjuvant CTI, the planes were a lot more difficult. They said they almost quoted the rectal scenario wherein they found that it is more difficult for them to find the plane. So they actually end up cutting more or probably giving wide margins and longer margins. That's number one. Number two, sometimes they see a lot of fibrosis due to which it becomes a lot more difficult. That is some which also is a problem for most of them. And adenocarcinoma, the dogma says that the nodal disease is a lot than in squamous cell carcinoma. So the nodal involvement is a lot more. So due to which they prefer a systemic approach before we probably for this thing. So if I ask them a simple question, obviously this is not going to be a study for me to prefer. One simple question, they prefer neoadjuvant CTRT or neoadjuvant chemotherapy given a choice, and 9 of them said it is the neoadjuvant chemotherapy. Having said that, I'll just, after giving this brief background, I'll go to my presentation. I think I will skip most of this. So I'll just go into the cross trial. The most important thing that we need to understand with the cross trial is, yes, it did show an improvement in overall survival, and there was a 3-year survival of 55%. Next slide, please. In the FLOAT trial, the 3-year overall survival was 57%, and the 30-day mortality or the 90-day mortality with FLOAT was around 5%. 90-day mortality was 5%, and FLOAT trial included a lot more patients with T4 disease and node positive disease as compared to cross trial. That needs to be remembered. Yes, there was no representation of squamous cell carcinoma, but across the world, they're finding that except for a few countries, the the adenocarcinoma component has become a lot more commoner histology. And if you see Europe, and many of the studies are done in Europe, you see the MAGIC, the ACCORD, and the FLOT trials, the Donald, and they have found that the adenocarcinoma component is up to 80% of their 80% of what they are seeing in their practice. So squamous cell carcinoma, a lot more commoner in the Asian region, probably is one of the ways you can probably say trial is more relevant to us. But just if you see the 3-year survival rate with FLOT perioperative chemotherapy, they found up to 72% survival rates. And there was a point which was raised by Dr. Sandeep saying that the tolerability is not good. It is about how well you use a weapon rather than using the weapon. So if you were to use at doses akin to the tolerability of the patient, I think we would get better results. Next slide, please. Like I said again, the FLOT trial, it had a lot of patients with a slightly poorer performance status as compared to the CROSS trial. And if you see, a T4 disease was around 8%. If you see the CROSS trial, the T4 disease was hardly anything. And even the node 1, node positive disease representation was a lot more. And yes, I agree with Dr. Batra that they did not include squamous as a histology. Next slide, please. If you see the overall survival rate, now I want to compare this. Cross trial comparison is not a fan. I'm not a fan of this. But if you see at 48 months, if you see 4 years across both the slides, you find that the 4 years at 4 years, FLOT gave a better survival rate as compared to the patients with no carcinoma in the cross trial. Next slide, please. Yeah. So again, there is a huge debate. We all are happy to give neoadjuvant CTRT in squamous cell carcinoma, but are we going to do that for adenocarcinoma, which behaves differently? There are a lot of publications which have said that carcinoma are more of a systemic spreading disease compared to that. You get more node positivity annotation. So can we apply the same data saying that you give neoadjuvant CTRT for carcinoma as well? The jury is still out. We have a large study, the ESOPIC study, which will answer that, but till then, we will probably use most of the data that is available. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. The final conclusion can be drawn by the ESOPEC trial. Next slide, please. Yeah. So why was this is very important for us to remember, and I think I'll close my case with this. Why was the ESOPEC trial was even planned? If it was so easy for everybody to say that the cross trial was outweighing the FLOT trial, why would this study be planned? And this study was not planned a long time back. It was planned after the results of both were available. One is exactly the case that was told by Dr. Batra, that there is, the surgical techniques were varied. But they did find that before the trial, they saw that the same authors who saw an overall survival of 70% with perioperative as opposed to 55% at 3 years with the neoadjuvant CRT. So they believe that they will get a hazard ratio of 0.645 if they were to use as compared to using the cross regimen. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone. Now that the debate is over, I request you to vote. The link is shared on your chat box. Himanshi has just shared that. I request everyone to vote. The link has been put in the chat box.
There are more than 101 people around and only 11 have voted so far. 15 now. So, Kashish, while you are continuing this, maybe we can ask Dr. Lalit to give his comments.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. So, I think, sir, both the debaters have put their point very wisely, and there are few take-home things like systemic treatment regimens are definitely needed for esophageal and esophagogastric carcinomas, squamous cell carcinoma as well as adenocarcinomas both. We need to choose the regimens widely, and it is not only based on the graph shown, but we need to see the patient's performance score, we need to see the comorbidity as well as the toxicity profile, and most importantly, that the surgical aspect should be dealt well. Many times we do a lot of chemotherapy radiation and the surgery has not been done as per the available standard guidelines. 3 drugs neoadjuvant chemotherapy may be tried in physically unfit patients with good performance score with good organ preserved, in keeping in mind the toxicity of 2 drugs may be used in select number of patients. Float had adverse event, and this was mainly to compare the toxicity profile and the mucositis profile. Pre-operative chemoradiation is preferred, and it is approved for localized adenocarcinoma of thoracic esophagus as well as esophagogastric cancers. We have seen the pathological CR was 16% with float and 29% with cross. So definitely local control is better, and we need to see the histological response. We need to see the margin status, and we need to anticipate and see the complications related to surgery, including resurgery, like 10% were said. And for higher stage and node positive, T3 and above patients, node positive, and patients who are borderlinely resectable, neoadjuvant chemotherapy plus radiotherapy is better than chemotherapy alone. So I think these are few points from my side. Dr. Mangesh wants to say something again.
So I want to make a point on this pathological CR. So I did ask the surgeons, and also there are some articles. See, pathological CR in esophagus is yet to show any so-called survival benefit vis-a-vis what we see in probably CA rectum or probably in CA breast. So we are not yet convinced. So what surgeons want is a good response, whether it's a complete response or a good partial response is something that they are concerned with. All they want is a good plane, because
Mangesh, you made your point. I think that is very important. It's time for us to move to the next session.
Thank you everyone.
Sorry. Over to the next session. The session director of the pancreatic session is Dr. Uma Dangi, medical oncologist from Mumbai, and the session coordinator is Dr. Anshul Agarwal. I now request Dr. Uma Dangi to please give the context setting. Over to you, ma'am.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us on this pancreatic cancer session for the GI Oncology Chakravyuh meet. So we all know that the chemotherapy in an adjuvant setting has remarkably improved outcomes in pancreatic cancer. But we also see that post-surgery, about 30 to 50% of patients with pancreatic cancer are unable to take their adjuvant chemotherapy because of complications or morbidity, etc. So the question arises that whether given chemotherapy in neoadjuvant setting would result in a better outcome. So that sets in today's debate. Which is, can you show the slide, please? So which is neoadjuvant chemotherapy versus upfront surgery in patients with resectable pancreatic cancer. So we have two debaters, Dr. Ganesh Nagarajan. He's going to talk for upfront surgery. He's a consultant surgical oncologist at Hinduja Hospital. And from Nagpur, we have Dr. Amol Dongre, who's a medical oncologist who's going to talk for neoadjuvant chemotherapy. So over to Dr. Ganesh for his talk on upfront surgery.
Yeah, am I audible?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, good evening and thanks for this opportunity. So we'll get into the debate right away. So what are we really talking about here? Is that the first slide? Yeah, so what are we really talking about here? We're talking about resectable pancreatic cancer. We have to exclude all borderline and locally advanced pancreatic cancer, and various definitions exist. So overall, we need to understand that any abutment, encasement, occlusion of SMV, portal vein, SMA, common hepatic artery would be excluded from this topic today. So we're looking at tumors which are in the pancreatic head with a good fat plane from the lumen of all these vessels. Next slide, please. So the question always arises as to, is chemotherapy for pancreatic cancer good enough that we can use it for resectable patients? Now, when you look at the life cycle of any chemo drug, it always starts with metastatic disease. Once it starts showing results, we go for locally advanced disease, and those who respond beautifully, those regimens that work very well for resectable, for locally advanced disease, then comes to resectable. When we look at pancreatic cancer, we're looking at around, at best, a 40%, 35 to 40% partial response for locally advanced pancreatic cancer. So we're probably not yet there. Next slide, please. If you look at all the data that comes out of comparing chemo versus upfront surgery for resectable pancreatic cancer, one thing that comes out in a big way, 34 to 36% of patients do not get resected even after the neoadjuvant chemotherapy. And that's a large number for a disease which is resectable upfront. So for various reasons, these patients don't get resected, and we need to really look at whether we're doing the right thing there. No difference in overall survival on the intention to treat analysis in the two groups. Of course, there are better R0 resections and long-term outcomes in the NAC group, but that is to be expected because it's a biologically more favorable group. Next slide, please. So let's look at this from a very clinical perspective. Common scenario, 70-year-old patient, post-PTCA with a bilirubin of 8. Upfront, two options with us. This is a small tumor in the head of pancreas, well away from the arteries and the veins. Upfront, option 1, upfront surgery followed by adjuvant chemotherapy. Option 2, we go for the neoadjuvant chemotherapy. You first need to get an EUS guided FNAC. Usually it's an FNAC that most of them do, often inconclusive. You have to repeat it. You're already a few thousand, 50, 60,000 down the drain and 2 weeks late. You need to get an ERCP stenting because the bilirubin is already 8 and it will progress further. So you would want to get a stent in. All the risks of ERCP stenting, like pancreatitis 10%, cholangitis 5%, blocked stent in the future, sepsis, all of them, you negotiate all of it and then come to the morbidity of FOLFIRINOX, which is not a simple combination of drugs to deal with for the patient. And once you've done all of that, it's no doubt, no wonder that 30-35% of patients drop out somewhere along the way and are not able to get the definitive Whipple surgery that they need. Next slide, please. And are we doing badly with upfront resections? You can see this, not according to the Prodige 24, published in the NEJM. So you've got upwards of 50% 5-year survival in upfront resectable pancreatic cancer, followed by adjuvant chemotherapy. Next slide, please. So to conclude, most patients are old. Neoadjuvant chemotherapy can be harsh on them. In resectable pancreatic cancer, if after chemotherapy 36% of patients don't come up for resection, we need to really rethink whether it's a viable strategy. Results of chemo in borderline resectable is at best moderate, so we need to think. Biopsy stenting, I think, involves significant delays. And in my opinion, resectable pancreatic cancer, upfront resection is still very much the way to go. I'd like to leave it to Amol. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Over to our next debater, Dr. Amol Dongre, medical oncologist from Nagpur. Over to you, sir.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Hi. Thanks, Dr. Ganesh. I know when Dr. Uma gave me this is a bit difficult to debate. So, as we know that the localized resectable pancreatic cancer is hardly 8% diagnosis and 5 years old is 22% next. So, when you see the median survival, even in the localized resectable cancer is hardly 15 to 19 months next. And even if it deemed resectable, still it has a dismal prognosis, as you have said in your presentation. So even though, we have substantially improved the surgical treatment of pancreatic adenocarcinoma and mortality is at an all-time low, but in high volume centers, still it appears unlikely that further improvement in surgical treatment will substantially improve the outcome of patient with pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma. So the efficient downsizing of tumor could result in a substantial increase in the proportion of R0 district, which we know is a prognostic. Next slide. So 5-year survival rates after complete resection are hardly 20 to 30% node negative, whereas it is 10% node positive. And we need to improve this resectability pancreatic cancer. And what we need to improve is to resection rate, overall survival, and quality of life. Next slide. So what is the goal of neoadjuvant therapy? Is to improve selection of patient for surgery. We know that window of opportunity to get to know the biology of respective tumor then increase margin negative resection rate, early treatment of micrometastasis, and obviously efficacy of neoadjuvant treatment as determined by pathological tumor response is paramount for improving survival. Next slide. Next slide. So this I'll just quote a article meta-analysis which is published in World Journal of Surgical Oncology, that is survival benefit of neoadjuvant chemoradiotherapy versus surgery in patients resectable or borderline resectable. Obviously, I'm not talking about borderline resectable, but you can, next slide. You can see there are n number of trials, which has been done. Even though many of them are retrospectively, but what I've highlighted is only the prospective trials in resectable pancreatic cancer. Next slide. Next slide. So these all are the trials which have been done on resectable pancreatic cancer, and mind you, all these are prospective trials. Next slide. And what I would just like to show, if you can see this in the, I have just come across this forest plot, and you can see this n number of trials in the resectable pancreatic cancer which has actually shown benefit of neoadjuvant chemo or neoadjuvant chemoradiation, which favors, in a resectable pancreatic cancer. Next slide. So apart from that, as I told you that getting pathological CR is of utmost importance. So there's a study by Yoon Shin MD et al. In Annals of Surgical Oncology, which again analyzed the data on 135 consecutive patients with chemoradiation followed by pancreatectomy. Next slide. And what they found that the median survival rates by pathologic response were better in those patients who have a minor response, 17 months versus 20 months versus 66 months for major response, pathological response. Next slide. So again, neoadjuvant therapy followed by resection versus upfront resection for resectable pancreatic cancer, a propensity scored match analysis. Next slide. Again, median survival is higher in patients who received neoadjuvant therapy compared with upfront resection to 26 versus 21 months. And overall survival at 1, 3 and 5 years was 83%, 31, 21 in neoadjuvant group as compared to 71%, 20 and 18 in upfront resected group. Even overall mortality was reduced in neoadjuvant therapy group with an estimate hazard ratio of 0.72. Next slide. Coming to the prospective data, next slide. Again, the Dutch randomized phase 3 pre-operative pancreatic trial. It is a randomized phase 3 trial which has done in 16 centers. The primary endpoint of this trial was overall survival. Next slide. Again, a total of 240 eligible patients were there, and the median overall survival was 16 months with pre-op chemoradiotherapy and 14.3 months with immediate surgery. And the resection rate was 61%. Mind you, here also the resection rate was just 72% in upfront resection. So maybe CT is unable to detect the micrometastasis or resectivity upfront. Next slide. So pre-op chemotherapy was also significant better BFS, local regional failure interval, and significant lower rate of pathologic lymph node perfusion, venous invasion. Next slide. Next slide.
Last slide, please.
Yeah, last slide. So last slide. Yeah. So basically, to conclude, pancreatic cancer is highly heterogeneous disease. Neoadjuvant treatment should be tailored to the individual tumor by establishing chemotherapy searching response signatures in pancreatic adenocarcinoma that could predict the response of the individual tumor. There are already examples in literature suggesting that this may be a realistic approach for at least for substantial proportion of tumors, and this approach could ensure that an individual patient with resectable pancreatic ductal adenocarcinoma receiving a neoadjuvant treatment with high chance of efficacy, thereby providing the best ratio between risk by adverse effect and benefit by improving overall survival. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Now we move on to the panel discussion. The moderator is Dr. T. Raja, medical oncologist from Chennai, and his panelists are Dr. Sushant Mittal, medical oncologist from New Delhi, Dr. Imran Sheikh, medical oncologist from Mumbai, Dr. Rupal Chadda, radiation oncologist from Mumbai, Dr. Adwaita Gore, medical oncologist from Mumbai, Dr. Vikram Chaudhary, surgical oncologist from Mumbai, and Dr. Shivani Bhatt, medical oncologist from Jamnagar. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, organizers, and welcome the panelists. We will, given the quick time, what we'll do, we'll try to go on a tumor board mode. We had some excellent debate just now. We'll see, we had 2 patients. We'll try to see whether we can cover 2 patients, whatever the time permits. One is an advanced disease, another one is an early disease. And I'll just, try to ask my panelists as to what they would do in the real life setting on a brief replies. And the case 1 is a lady. She is 64-year-old female and advanced pancreatic cancer. I'll present the history. Next slide. She was evaluated for an abdominal discomfort, and she presented to us in September 2019. And the scans show that there is an hypermetabolic lesion in the head of the pancreas, and it compresses the distal CBD with upstream dilatation of CBD, and bilobar dilatations are there. And we also saw non-FDG avid liver lesions, multiple liver lesions were there. and the CA19-9 was 2,800 something, and the liver biopsy was positive for metastatic adenocarcinoma, and the endoscopic ultrasound FNA of the head lesion was also positive. She underwent a stenting, and as Dr. Ganesh pointed out, these are all the perils of the disease in the head of the pancreas. And the patient also gave a history of coronary artery disease sometime back, very stable, and but normal functions. Next slide. So that's the setting, and I will begin with my surgeons. Dr. Imran, first question to you is, in this setting, in pancreatic cancer, if there are only, let's say, 2 to 3 metastatic lesions, as a concept, is there any role for surgery?
I don't think so. Any role for the upfront surgery. We will probably get the biopsy and we will patient for the palliative chemotherapy.
Thank you. Dr. Vikram, do you have any other thoughts on surgery in a metastatic setting?
No, there is definitely no role for surgery in metastatic pancreatic cancer.
And Dr. Rupal, the radiation oncologist, I mean, is there any role that you think if the patient is referred to you in a multidisciplinary setting, would you think about radiation at some point in this setting?
Yes. We would think about radiation, especially in a metastatic setting. In case she has presented with pain, we can give her palliative radiation. Also, if her GC is permits and it's good, we can also think about now we are thinking about SBRT in such lesions wherein we have seen abscopal effects for the other metastatic lesions as well. Okay. But essentially palliative setting. Yes.
Okay. Anyway, I'll show the pictures down the line. Dr. Advait, the question to you is that we are now left with the surgeons and the radiation have said that it's your baby, first line treatment. What are your thoughts, Dr. Advait?
So I think in the treatment decision making, it is very clear that we are dealing with an advanced disease. And I think when we plan for treatment for such an individual who's 64 with cardiac comorbidities, I think a proper discussion with the patient regarding what the aims of treatment are going to be and what outcomes we are looking at firstly need to be clearly explained. We know that this is a disease in which even with the best regimens, a median PFS of only 6 to 6.5 months is achieved. But now there is also good data coming in about germline BRCA testing for patients with advanced metastatic pancreatic cancer, and would like to discuss those options also and then select out an appropriate first line therapy for the patient based on the comorbidities and based on how symptomatic the patient is and the other coexisting illnesses.
Yeah, a good discussion. Thank you. I mean, that's what you emphasized. Dr. Shivani, so in that case, what is the first line that comes to your mind, Dr. Shivani?
Yeah, if in this patient with her 64 age and with a past cardiac history, if she's as Advait said, we should discuss the goal of the treatment, and we should also check for the BRCA mutation status also. And if she's in a good PS with as there's a control comorbidities and with a good support, good nutritional status, we can consider if she is ready for the aggressive treatment.
She's in a good general condition and a good performance status.
Yeah, so we can consider about because it's we can offer her FOLFIRINOX as a palliative chemotherapy.
Okay, thank you. Next slide. So that's what Dr. Shivani is trying to allude to. FOLFIRINOX compared with gemcitabine, in the first line, it's phase 2-3 randomized trial. And the next slide. This is what we get. We get a progression-free survival advantage from 3 months to 6 months, and we get overall survival advantage from 6 months to 11 months. Next slide. But we also have other choices. Dr. Sushant, FOLFIRINOX, any other choice, Dr. Sushant?
No, I would not like to give FOLFIRINOX. It's quite a toxic regimen even for 45, 50-year-old patients for neoadjuvant setting also. So in metastatic setting, 64-year-old with cardiac comorbidity, I would go with gemcitabine. And if she responds well, then I would like to add nab-paclitaxel also if she is tolerating well. So I will start with gemcitabine therapy.
Single agent therapy.
single agent therapy. And if it tolerates it well, then I'll add on nab-paclitaxel maybe 2 or 3 weeks after I get to know and I have the confidence that she's tolerating well and she's doing well, she's improving, then I like to add nab-paclitaxel also along with that.
Thank you. Well, next slide. And that's what Dr. Sushant is alluding to. The gemcitabine plus nab-pacli would give us a PFS of 3.7 to 5 months and an OAS from 6 to 8. Remember the numbers from the FOLFIRINOX data that the OAS will be at 11 and the PFS will be at around nearly 7 to 8. The next slide. And that's the comparison between FOLFIRINOX and the nab-pacli gem data in first line. Both are phase 3 randomized trials, and that's what is the flavor of what we are going to get. We are going to get an overall response rate of 32% in the FOLFIRINOX, and gem nab-pacli would give you around 23%, and similar gemcitabine is the same, and this is what you will get. We have talked about the PFS and OAS. The next slide. So therefore, coming back to my medical oncologist, Dr. Advaita, how will you choose between these two in the first line setting? I have alluded to these. Any other points that you want to bring?
I think, sir, you've rightly put up most of the points here regarding the performance status. So naturally, selection of FOLFIRINOX over gem nab-pacli, when we decide, generally age is what we look at. The first thing, we know that the patients who are generally less than 65 years of age without comorbidities which are uncontrolled, these are the group of patients where we even discuss about FOLFIRINOX with them. And FOLFIRINOX is just one, but there are multiple modifications of FOLFIRINOX which can be done, which can also be used in the same situation. Patients who are having multiple comorbidities in terms of diabetic patients, patients having pre-existing neuropathy, cardiac problems, yes, those patients we would be really using oxaliplatin at a higher dose, and the same stands true even for nab-paclitaxel because patients have a lot of sensory neuropathy post nab-paclitaxel also.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Advaita. I think you made your point. I can say that Shivani almost voted for FOLFIRINOX, and Advaita and Sushant probably voted for a gemcitabine nab-pacli. But let me show what we have done. Next slide. And she was started on gemcitabine nab-pacli, as two of you said, because we also thought about age, we also thought about the previous coronary artery disease. But after 3 cycles, this is what we saw, disease progression. Next slide. And that's what happened. And now, the radiation oncologists, and they can also look at this image. This was what we had at the end of 3 cycles of gem nab-pacli. So then we are stuck. Next slide. Therefore, we were compelled, the patient was still in a good general condition, and then we were compelled to consider a second line option. So I'm coming back to Dr. Shivani. Shivani, we didn't listen to you. We failed on our first line option. What do we do?
Yes, sir, because she failed on gemcitabine based chemotherapy and she's still in a good performance status. And if she's willing for treatment, we need to go for 5-FU leucovorin based chemotherapy now. And according to the data available, the leucovorin 5-FU with liposomal irinotecan is the standard of care, but other options are also with oxaliplatin also. We can use it.
Next slide. We are really racing against the time. That's the phase 3 data in the second line. Post gemcitabine based, if a patient has progressed on gemcitabine based therapy, we have to look at 5-FU based. FOLFOX data and 5-FU leucovorin data is there, just to give you a flavor of what's available on the published data. Next slide. And as you rightly pointed out, the liposomal irinotecan plus 5-FU leucovorin data, NAPOLI1, next slide, can give you something like a PFS of about double the PFS as versus 5-FU leucovorin alone. This is the same thing happened with the FOLFOX also. So therefore, what we did, next slide, and this is the kind of sequencing. If you notice, if you have a FOLFIRINOX failed patient, you will consider gem nab-pacli, and if you have a gemcitabine failed patient, you have to consider 5-FU leucovorin plus minus irinotecan, so on and so forth. Next slide. But what we did is we counseled the patient, we talked about FOLFIRINOX, and then we put the patient on FOLFIRINOX. And after 6 to 7 cycle, at the end of 6, we wanted to do a scan, but it happened after the 7 because of some small infection, something. So I'll show you the scans. After the 7th cycle of FOLFIRINOX, this is what we had. Next slide. Excellent response. You can see that there is a very impressive response on the PET CT. Next slide. And you can see that all the liver lesions. Now you can see, more or less a 3-dimensional picture of those liver lesions. That will be of interest for the radiation oncologist because this is a liver-limited disease. But this is the excellent response that we achieved. And the next slide. So this is where we ended up after 6 to 7 cycles. So now I have a good response, 6 to 7 cycles done. Is there anything else to think differently, Dr. Sushant?
Sir, if she's tolerating well, I think we'll continue with the same therapy.
Would you want to give a chance to the radiation oncologist at this point or not, Dr. Rupal?
Radiation too?
I mean, she talked about SBRTs and all that. Just wanted to.
Yeah. But see, because she's responding well to this chemo, we will continue with the chemo. In case she has any other problems like pain, or if the lesion is not responding to further chemo, then we can think about it further.
Thank you for letting us to continue. Next slide. That's what we did. We went ahead and completed 12 cycles. Next slide. We kind of cleaned up on the patient, completely clear scans, excellent response, near CR on the radiology. That's all we can say. Next slide. So at this point, what do I do? I'll come back to Dr. Advaita. At this point, we have achieved a very good response. What do I do, Dr. Advaita?
I think, sir, the number of cycles would depend on how well you've got the response and how well the patient is tolerating. So now with the new data coming in, that about 7 to 9% of patients can be germline BRCA mutation positive. I would want to do a germline BRCA testing here to actually evaluate whether the patient fits into the evaluation for a PARP inhibitor as a maintenance therapy. Otherwise, most of the patients who are on FOLFIRINOX generally don't go beyond 8 to 10 cycles, because by the time some of the other toxicity does start coming in. And,
so your point is that as much as the patient tolerates toxicity, we consider an option. Next slide. So you have talked about the importance of molecular profiling. So I'll go to Dr. Sushant. What sort of molecular profiling should we look at pancreatic cancer?
Recently, the BRCA testing has been approved, and we have olaparib for that. And about 2.5% of the patients may be positive. So molecular profiling can be done for that, and also NGS can be done, which will include the BRCA as well as other molecules or genetic changes which are druggable.
Fine. Next slide. And you have touched upon all the points. Next slide. And that's what we did. The patient had one of their daughter is in US, so she took the samples to US, and we also sent it in India. This is University of California, San Francisco gene panel. They have identified BRCA mutation, and we also identified the BRCA2 mutation. Next slide. And that's our pathogenic variant. So at this setting, I'll come to Dr. Shivani. What would you do? I have a BRCA2 mutation positive, 12 cycle, very good CR, probably radiological, almost a radiological CR. What's our option?
Okay, so in this case, this is a germline mutation. In patients with germline mutation and BRCA positive, we can go ahead with the olaparib maintenance.
Okay, next slide. So that's what you wanted to point out, the POLO data on olaparib maintenance. Next slide. And that can give us a PFS of 7.4 months and the median duration of response. If at all the patient had some disease at this point and olaparib is introduced to the tune of about nearly 24 months, you can endure the response with olaparib if at all you have a patient. Next slide. And that's what we did. We have started on olaparib. She's already on olaparib and doing very well, tolerating so far so well. Next slide. So we'll go to the case 2, and there's an early pancreatic cancer, and we are moving into surgeon's domain at this point. Next slide. And so we had a patient that was in October last year, and in short, there was a hyperdense lesion in the tail of the pancreas. And Dr. Ganesh nicely talked about the difficulties in making decisions about resectability, particularly in the head. The middle section is probably the most difficult. That's what I understand. Here is the tail. In the tail of the pancreas, and 2 to 3 centimeter, and nothing else. I'll show you the picture. And there was one low-grade metabolically active left gastric lymph node, which showing restricted diffusion and appeared suspicious, and nothing else. Next slide. That's the picture. You can see the tail of the pancreas lesion about 2 to 3 centimeter, and a little bit of peripancreatic stranding. No vessels are compromised. Everything is clean. And next slide. You can see that perigastric single lymph node, suspicious, not very sure. Of course, we offered, further investigations and all, so on and so forth. But I'll come to Dr. Imran. So, Dr. Imran, what can you do here?
So first of all, we'll just confirm this lymph node by doing endoscopic ultrasonography, and if it is possible to take a biopsy from the lymph node.
Okay.
And as per the biopsy report, probably we can proceed. If it turn out to
say if the biopsy is positive, if the biopsy is negative, is that going to change your decision?
So it is, of course, this lymph node happens to be a distal lymph node, and it is not a part of a standard dissection.
Okay.
So if the biopsy comes positive, it's a distal lymph node, and the options of surgical will go down, and mostly it will go into the palliative setting.
Let's say if the lymph node is negative.
Yeah, then definitely we'll go ahead with staging.
Dr. Vikram?
Sorry?
I would slightly disagree with Imran here. I think this node is to the left of the left gastric, and it's very much in the template for a radical distal pancreaticostomy or RAMS, with what we call it. And therefore, in the setting of a primary malignancy, I would include this lymph node station, and therefore I would avoid an endoscopic ultrasound in this patient.
So anyway, I'll sorry, next slide. Of course, these are all the categories, and already it was talked about that. Let's leave alone the borderline resectable, unresectable. Let's say this is clearly resectable, and to give you a clue, endoscopic ultrasound did happen, and it turned out to be negative. So it's deemed resectable. So would you allow us to do a pre-operative neoadjuvant therapy or not? Maybe I'll ask Dr. Imran and Dr. Vikram. Yes or no? That's all I want to know.
I would not go ahead with neoadjuvant therapy in this patient.
Dr. Imran?
I would also not go ahead with neoadjuvant. We'll probably go for upfront surgery.
Okay, only one more question, Dr. Rupal. Do you think at any point you are going to consider radiation in this patient?
Unless she's not surgically, medically not operable.
Okay, I'll give you the story. The next slide. Next slide. We don't have to talk about the advantages and disadvantages, and what are all. This is the SWOG data presented in ASCO 2020 about picking the winner. If at all somebody wants to do a preoperative neoadjuvant therapy, and nobody turned out to be a winner. Both gave next slide. The 2-year overall survival rate was less than 50%. Next slide. But there are Japanese data which strongly favor neoadjuvant chemotherapy and neoadjuvant CTRT. Only 2. Next slide. And so I'll just narrate the story. This patient went to MD Anderson. We offered surgery. The patient went to MD Anderson. They did the endoscopic ultrasound, turned out to be negative, but they still went ahead and gave neoadjuvant chemotherapy. But after about 2 months, four cycles, it showed a mild progression. So the patient undergoes surgery, margins clear, node is negative. That's what really happened to the patient. And at this point, the patient is on adjuvant, gemcitabine. That's what is happening. Next slide. So, if at all, only one more question to my med-onc. Would they still want to give adjuvant therapy? If so, what? I'll turn to Dr. Shivani.
So in case with good performance status, still we can go with FOLFIRINOX adjuvant chemotherapy. And if not so, she can receive gemcitabine with capecitabine.
Okay.
So reduce.
I'll go to my last slide because our time is up. I'll just finish it off. Last slide. This is the theory about which is the best option. Please hold on in this slide. As I told you, the patient progressed on FOLFIRINOX. So what they did, they operated, and it turned out that the node was negative, all-round resection margin, everything was clear. So they have advised gemcitabine-based adjuvant therapy. The patient is back here with us on adjuvant therapy. That's what happened. And anyway, this is the slide that is something I think is very important because KFC has offered, free chickens for all healthcare workers who are fighting the COVID, and they have allocated 1 million supply. So I highly recommend that we should also ask for such things. With that note, I thank all my panelists.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Now I request the session director to please moderate the question and answers.
Thank you, Kashish. So after that wonderful debate and a very nice panel discussion, we'll move on to the question and answer session. The first question is from Dr. Girish Bedre. Neoadjuvant radiation, 25 gray 5 fractions has also shown good results. Any comment on that? So that question would be directed to Dr. Rupal.
Yeah, so as I said, like SPRT, this is a hypofractionated radiation. 25 in 5 is a very good dose. People have gone even higher. So that is a good step dose, which can be given in neoadjuvant setting.
The second question is from Dr. Amish Vora. In this patient, I think he means the first patient.
If I can just briefly intervene, for want of time, there are two positive neoadjuvant therapy. One is the gemcitabine plus S1, and then there is a gemcitabine RT, RT and gemcitabine, and then these are the two positive data that is known as pre-op or something like that, the pre-op RAD trial. I couldn't present it because of the time. Those have clearly shown they have met their primary endpoints of superiority, and the FOLFIRINOX and the gem-based therapeutic options did produce, still an advantage in their survival, but they couldn't meet their primary endpoint because they had a cutoff of 50% as the survival something, and they ended up at 48%. That's why they were deemed as, and there was a race between the two options, which one to go for neoadjuvant option. But I want to tell you, most of the American centers are in favor of neoadjuvant therapy, and that's what happened to our patient.
The next question is by Dr. Amish. In this patient, I think he means the first patient. Would anybody give FOLFIRINOX in a patient who's already undergone a cardiac stenting? So I think that was answered. People who are more willing to give gem-nab-paclitaxel. But any comments, Advait?
I'll answer that. No, I'll let Advait answer.
Yeah, so Uma, I think cardiac stenting is not a complete contraindication. I think you would really go and look at what the ejection fraction is and what the global longitudinal strain is, speak to the cardiologist, and then take a clearance before we start, because we know that this abbreviated infusion of 5-FU really doesn't cause too much of cardiac toxicity. But of course, as I said, patients who are having comorbidities, we are careful.
So thank you, Advait. I'll answer that. I'll complete. What happened is we discussed with the patient, 2 daughters, both of them are in US, and cardiac opinion is done. But then, if you notice, the BRCA testing was done at the end of the, at the upfront, and we got the result in 1 month. By the time we have already failed in nab-paclitaxel. So we didn't go into the other data set wherein when there is a BRCA positivity, there is a very strong data set to support any platinum. So therefore, we lean towards FOLFIRINOX, and we ended up using FOLFIRINOX. The patient was in a good performance status. Lucky that everything went on well, very good response. That's what actually happened in this patient.
I think we've already answered this question, modified FOLFIRINOX. Next question. Okay, so this is a very interesting question. Is there a benefit of low-dose capecitabine in this case, which had an excellent response to FOLFIRINOX, if the patient can't go for NGS, or whether if patient becomes BRCA negative? Your comments?
Dr. Sushant, you can take that.
Yeah, I think this is a good strategy, and most of us do follow that of giving low dose capecitabine as a maintenance drug.
But why should we do maintenance? There is no
because the setting is palliative and the patient has a disease, so we have a fear that disease will come back. We want to give something 5-FU based to keep the brakes on the disease.
Just like a colon strategy.
Yeah.
But then do we use the same maintenance if we are treated the patient with gem-nab-pacli? Here, if you're treating with FOLFIRINOX and continuing 5-FU, if someone has got a good response, I completely understand. But when someone is on gem-nab-pacli, do you switch the maintenance to capecitabine?
Ideally, yes. I think we should continue. Some therapy should be given since we have a response on the gem-nab-pacli. So we would like to give definitely something, keep the response.
There is also the concept of drug holiday, I believe, because if there is too much of toxicity with the drug, then one may have to consider giving drug holiday for some time and maybe treat at progression. Because I'm not sure if there is going to be any survival benefit treating before disease progression. Any comments on that?
Doctor holiday, you see, definitely the patient would ask for a doctor holiday. There is data to do that. Colon, yes, on a more serious note, there is data on switch maintenance and maintenance in lung. And, Parvish Parikh had led those kind of trials in his Tata days. But then there is no such data in pancreas. If at all you continue until toxicity is fine. But I don't think we should waste a drug on a switch maintenance strategy. I don't think there is such strategies in pancreas established. That's my opinion, but then I leave it to the panelists to say yes or no.
Thank you all. I think there are no more questions. So thank you, Dr. Raja. Thank you all my panelists. And thank you, Dr. Amol and Dr. Ganesh for the wonderful session. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Raja.
Thank you all of you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now over to our next session. This session is sponsored by Eli Lilly. Our speaker and faculty for the session is Dr. Prasad Narayan, medical oncologist from Bangalore. Over to you, sir. So you can share your slides, sir.
Yeah, beginning. I'm just sharing the slide. So we'll be discussing about some real-world data on the evidence of Cyramza in metastatic gastric cancer. We all know about the data about the role of Cyramza in second-line management of metastatic gastric cancer in combination with the paclitaxel and as single agent from the Rainbow and Regard studies. So this will be some discussion on two real-world experience of the drug, and this is from Korea. This is a 265 patient data, 28 sites, which used the combination, and then they had an analysis of the same. So combination patients were significantly younger, 57 versus 62. I don't think that is much significant there. And this was the outcome. It is almost similar to the outcome what we get in other situations. So there was an improvement in median progression-free survival as well as the median overall survival, similar to the one which is seen in the clinical trial. And more importantly, the progression-free survival rate at 6 months. If the patients got a ramucirumab combination, they had a progression-free survival of almost 2/3 of the patients were progression-free at 6 months. And this is the ramucirumab plus paclitaxel versus ramucirumab monotherapy. As I told, 2/3 of the patients had a disease control rate. The partial response was seen in around 16% and stable disease in around 50% of the patients. That is similar to the data from the clinical trial. And there is another real-world data from Europe, 167 patients from 25 Italian hospitals. They received this drug on a compassionate use program with a median follow-up of almost 1 year. About 1/4 of the patients had HER2-positive disease in this group. And 90% of the patients had received ramucirumab and paclitaxel, and 10% had received the monotherapy. The ECOG performance score was 0 and 1 in majority of the patients here, and almost 90% of them received the combination therapy. And again, the response rates were similar, 20% overall response rate. And if you take the disease control rate, around 60%. So this is consistent across the clinical trial data as well as when you see the real world data. And if you compare the trial data along with the real world data, it's almost similar. We get a median overall survival of around 9 to 10 months in this combination, and a response rate of around 20 to 25% if you use a combination of ramucirumab and paclitaxel in second line gastric. So the key takeaways from that was that the randomized control trial which established Cyramza or ramucirumab in this setting proved that it provides statistically significant survival advantages with reasonably good safety profile and tolerability. The real world data just underscores and confirms that it is consistent with the ones from the randomized control trials. So that establishes Cyramza plus paclitaxel as the new standard of care in second line setting. So the Pan-Asian adopted ESMO clinical practice guidelines for the management of metastatic gastric cancer actually has considered this as the option in second line based on the patient's performance status and also based on whether the patients have got a MSI high or low to include pembrolizumab or nivolumab in the second line. And this was supposed to be a panel-based discussion, and we don't have, I think, any panelists in this group because of some situations which happened. So I'll just present this case, which is an interesting patient, 36-year-old lady who was diagnosed with it's a routine patient with a carcinoma stomach, young patient who had an antral mass with biopsy-proven adenocarcinoma. And the patient somehow underwent direct surgery actually. This patient had an obstruction as presentation. There was no neoadjuvant chemotherapy or anything given to the patient. And the patient had multiple nodal metastasis, poor prognosis, young patient, and the patient was started on FOLFOX chemotherapy as adjuvant. But the patient had a progression of disease in the middle of the treatment after around 6 cycles of chemotherapy. There was no evidence of disease, but the patient progressed within the planned adjuvant therapy. And there was a local progression as well. So at this point, most of the time we would have actually done an MSI and a HER2/neu analysis for this patient. That was supposed to be the panel discussion question actually. So the patient was taken up for treatment with paclitaxel and ramucirumab, and fortunately the patient had a good response. The post 3 cycles there was a response to therapy, and then the patient continued. So this patient had a disease control of almost around 8 months on progression, which is very good for this patient. And on 25th of June, the CT scan showed stable disease, and the patient has been now stopped. The chemotherapy part has been stopped, and the patient is on single agent ramucirumab. And the patient has COVID positivity, which is detected recently, and the dose has been held. So in summary, the standard of care in first line metastatic gastric cancer is, of course, a fluoropyrimidine platinum combination. And ramucirumab has established its role in monotherapy as well as in combination with paclitaxel, where there is improvement in overall survival in second line. The drug is well tolerated. There is improvement in quality of life as well as survival. So sequencing through multiple lines of therapy is the main thing to improve outcomes in metastatic gastric cancer, like in any other cancer, which we discussed in pancreatic cancer just before this talk. So the real world evidence actually gives more confidence that the drug stands its effects in the real world as well as in the clinical trial. And MSI testing definitely will receive out those patients who will definitely benefit with immunotherapy. You can stop with that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Prasad. I think over to Dr. Vikas.
Thank you everybody for being so patient and for an excellent second day of the session. We will conclude tonight. Thank you everybody for an active participation, and we are looking forward tomorrow again at 1 p.m. Please, we'll request everyone to join at 12:55 p.m. Sharp for again a power punch session for tomorrow. Thanks a lot everybody. A very good night and take care, stay safe, stay healthy. Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Dr. Bharat Vaswani was supposed to do some case presentation. Unfortunately, he is not available right now. So we'll request him to join us tomorrow and see if we can accommodate him at the end of tomorrow's program. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a good, safe night, and see you tomorrow at 1 o'clock.